Welcome back to Kings of Columbus. Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, and Jeremy Birmingham will be along later for part 3 of a 3-part series, Landis. It's about Ohio State's rivals in the current college football landscape. We started with Ohio State-Oregon a couple weeks ago, the new Big Ten rival for the Buckeyes. Last week, we did Ohio State-Michigan, the rival for the Buckeyes. And now we're going to do Ohio State-Georgia, which I think is fairly seen as the national rival for the Ohio State Buckeyes. So you and I are going to kind of break down Ohio State versus Georgia. Birm will come on later to do Ohio State and Georgia recruiting with us. And then the three of us will do what you watch and what you think at the end. Putting it in this box, though, is it fair to view Georgia as Ohio State's number one national rival now in a way that maybe we did with Clemson a couple years ago? Maybe theoretically, probably after 2014 or building up to 2014, after Urban Meyer came to Ohio State, it was probably Alabama. You viewed it that way. Is it now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. It's obviously a little bit different with Clemson because they ended up playing Clemson, 3 times in like 7 years or something like that. So,
yeah,
so
13,
this isn't
19, 20. Yeah.
Yeah. So this isn't quite to that extent, but they have played Georgia, right? And I think Georgia has certainly taken the spot at the number one spot in the sport ahead of Alabama now, especially with Nick Saban gone. So that is kind of the benchmark, I think, that every program that considers itself a national title contender is now comparing itself to. So I absolutely think that Georgia, and they combined with like Clemson falling off a little bit too. And we'll see what happens with them, and then a factor in the Saban thing. And yeah, I think Georgia is now that team that's kind of in that specific sightline for Ohio State.
If you said to Georgia fans, or if we had a Georgia guest on this show and said, hey, Ohio State's Georgia's national rival, would they agree with that? Or would they be like, what are you talking about? Show me a national title in the last 10 years, beat Georgia, and then maybe we can talk. But this is a fantasy world at the moment.
That's an interesting question, actually.
Dog mentality.
I think probably not. And that is informed by the build up to Ohio State playing Georgia in the Peach Bowl 2 years ago, and like talking to Georgia people who seemed like very dismissive of Ohio State. And then Georgia won. Like, it was obviously a tight game, but Georgia did win. So I can't imagine that point of view has changed much. So no, I doubt that Georgia thinks about Ohio State quite in these terms.
Dogs ain't got no national rival, bro. What do you mean, man? Only rivals dogs themselves. Dog mentality. I could wear the hat the whole show, but I have a hat. I have a hat show planned for later.
Oh boy.
Let's talk about tiers then. I want to start us off with tiers to try to figure out if these teams are on the same level. So it depends where you cut your tier. Let me offer you 3 choices.
Mm-hmm.
Choice 1 is Georgia is in a tier by itself. The top tier of college football is Georgia, and Ohio State is not in Georgia's tier. Ohio State would be in the tier below with several other teams. The other option is Ohio State and Georgia are the top tier. Those are the 2. If we're basing it on right now, a little bit of the past, but mostly roster resources, future right now, they're a top 2. And the other option is the top tier is Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and Michigan, which is a tip of the cap of respect for what Alabama has been, a tip of the cap of respect for what Michigan did last season, 3 straight playoff appearances. And we're kind of pushing to the side or giving the benefit of the doubt to Alabama and Michigan, who lost their head coaches. That absolutely defined who they were. But we're gonna give more credit to the recent past. Georgia by itself, Georgia and Ohio State, or Georgia, Ohio State, Bama, Michigan. Which do you believe is the top tier of college football, or is there a 4th option?
No, I think those are probably the 3. I would say I do not believe that it is the 3rd option. I'm struggling between the 1st and the 2nd. I think I would probably have to say that Georgia is alone as on the top tier, because like while I would as an addendum to that, I would say that like maybe the 2nd tier is Ohio State by itself. But I think Georgia, with multiple national championships, with consistency in recruiting and on the field, like I think they deserve to be by themselves.
I think that's probably right from a national championship standpoint. That this is a team that's won 2 in the last 3 years versus one that hasn't won a national title in 10 years. It's hard to put them on the same level. But we're going to play the roster breakdown game, and we're going to come away, I think, from the roster breakdown game of saying, I don't know, man. This is kind of a toss-up between these two rosters. So I think if you really want to go by that, ignore the past. We're talking right now. Or at least understand that these are great programs, but don't get too specific about the past, and then look at talent this year. Then I think that's your case for there's a top tier of these two teams.
Yes. If you're my initial answer was like program, not just this year, like last decade, consistency, whatever, I would put Georgia by itself. Teams this year, 2024, I don't know. They're definitely on the same tier. I think you could put Texas maybe on on the same level as them. If you're just talking about like who are the 3 most talented teams in the college football, I think it's those 3.
Okay. Before we get into the roster breakdown, let's do a coach breakdown here. Do you believe I certainly came away from the playoff semifinal in the Peach Bowl after the 2021 season, believing that Kirby Smart was a guy who 2022 season was a guy who knew how to run a program. And I thought that he is 3 years ahead of Ryan Day on their head coaching cycle. He's entering year 9. Ryan Day's entering year 6. They both became head coaches at basically the same age, right around age 40. I thought to myself, this is a path for Ryan Day to follow in terms of building. You're good right away, but maybe you need to learn how to win, to learn how to get over the top. And there might have been a time in Kirby Smart's career where you thought, all right, this guy's good. He made Georgia better, but I don't know, like where, and then they've sort of taken over the sport. Do you believe that to be that if Ryan Day, maybe not coached the same way, but some lessons learned, could Ryan Day learn anything from Kirby Smart?
Yeah, probably. I think a lot of people might be able to learn some things from the Kirby Smart arc, right? Like maybe including us who kind of analyze what Ryan Day is doing here. Like I understand that certainly the last 3 years, the results haven't been what Ohio State fans want, and I've seen some other people who are like pretty staunch Ryan Day defenders, like hold up Kirby Smart as an example. Like the first 5 years of Kirby Smart's tenure weren't exactly, I think, what Georgia fans had in mind. Like not bad, but hadn't really gotten over the top until they won back-to-back national titles. So I do think there's something in there for Ryan Day to learn. I would be lying if I said I knew like the inner workings of what was happening at Georgia to like help put Georgia over the top ultimately. But I'm sure that Kirby Smart just didn't keep doing the same thing for 5 straight years and weren't yielding the results they wanted. And then all of a sudden broke through. I'm sure he took some pretty hard looks at what they were doing and figured out ways to get over that hump ultimately. And I kind of feel like Ryan Day's in a similar spot this offseason, to be honest, like the giving up the play calling, the retooling the staff, being more aggressive with NIL, being more of a CEO type of coach. It does seem like he's trying to follow a similar path, if that makes sense. So I think there are lessons there, and there are probably lessons there for people outside of the coaching sphere about giving a guy a little bit of time to kind of get his program up and running.
Kirby Smart won his first national title in year 6. Ryan Day is entering year 6.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Kirby Smart getting a week-long look up close at the Georgia program after having never done that before. I thought Kirby Smart at that time, when we were sort of in the thick of the Ryan Day giving up play calling discussion, had a very good mix of total control over the entire program, but getting nitty-gritty, detailed specifics with his expertise on the defensive side of the ball when needed. He even talked about the idea of, I'm not the defensive play caller, I'm not the defensive coordinator, but I'll dive in when I need to. When I think there's a problem, I get more in the weeds. When I think we're going great, I back off. And I think that is a very good way to do it. And he had some younger coaches, but I mean, Dan Lanning became the head coach at Oregon because of what he did as the defensive coordinator at Georgia. Will Muschamp is now in that role at Georgia. That's a former head coach at Florida, right? Like he's been around the block a little bit. I think Will Muschamp and Chip Kelly, other than the personal stuff with Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, is not a terrible comparison. It's somebody who's been a head coach, now as a coordinator. And so I thought that to me was, that's what Ryan Day should strive for in terms of control of the program. Because there's even little stuff. You grasp for straws. Kirby Smart was like, we do yoga at the beginning of practice. Because I went to a yoga class and I was like, we're doing yoga. And I was like, all right, that's a guy with complete control saying we're doing yoga. And I think in year 6, which was the go year for Kirby Smart, I think Ryan Day is pushing towards that. And I don't think he's doing it because of Kirby Smart, but I think Kirby Smart is an example of that working.
Yeah, I think. I think the yoga is just get more connected to your roster kind of thing, right? There's a million different ways you could potentially do that. I don't know whether or not Ryan Day is a yogi. Maybe he's not. Yeah. I know he likes to play tennis, but I don't think he can take 110 guys over to the tennis center and go hit the ball around. So I think that I would imagine that there was a time in Kirby Smart's early tenure at Georgia where he thought to himself he didn't have his finger on the pulse of the entire roster, right? And I think he would say that he definitely does now. And I think Ryan Day over time has realized that maybe he didn't have that enough either. And what he's done this offseason on the field, off the field, I think is a way to kind of again gain that control you're talking about. And it's not like control like ruling the program with an iron fist kind of thing. It's just you have the lay of the land, everything that's happening kind of under your own roof, and you are the person at the top of all that, and embracing what that means too. I think Ryan Day struggled with that for a little bit too. Sometimes he just wanted to go into his office and scribble on a notebook and draw ball plays, and I think he's realized that is not the life of a college football head coach. So it's all good, right? It takes time, I think, to realize that, and it does seem like Ryan Day's at that point now.
I'll mention this every time we talk about Kirby Smart as a head coach on this show. He has not had control of his program off the field in the same way. And 100%. That includes a player on his roster dying in a DUI accident, which when you're the head coach, everything stops at your desk. And they've had, maybe not in the last couple months, but they certainly had a run there of multiple players having issues with speeding and getting driving citations. And Ohio State has not had a commensurate, at least public, issue with people breaking the law and having tragic consequences. I still believe it is among the most uncovered stories of college football in the modern era that a current player died.
And a staffer.
The staffer was driving the car and she was killed in the accident. And then a current player was in the backseat and died. One of your current players died because of the actions of somebody employed by your program. I still can't believe that there were not more repercussions for the program. And that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the tragic loss of life for those families. But it absolutely, to me, still needs to be brought up every single time with Kirby Smart. And then when you still had other players having similar driving issues, it's okay, he does not have a handle on this. And there have been times in my almost 20 years of covering Ohio State where it felt like Ohio State was having more off the field things and maybe did not have a handle on everything. And I'm not vouching for everything being perfect at Ohio State or anywhere else right now. But it gives me pause in my evaluation of Kirby Smart. It gives me pause in my view of the Georgia program. And I just don't know if it gives other people enough pause.
Doesn't seem, I think it does, but maybe not necessarily the people who could shine a light on it the most, right? Just it went woefully undercovered. I don't know how that happened. And I like that. I don't think these two things are related, but it's sort of similar idea, right? Didn't Kirby Smart like have a hand in like helping change the state's open records laws to like make it more difficult to get access to what's happening with Georgia athletics? It's like not everything that's happening with that program is necessarily above board. On the field, they're incredible. The guy knows how to coach football, but if we're going to talk about control, certainly that falls under the umbrella of control. So to say that he has total control is probably is not correct.
All right. It's one of those things. I always say I don't mean to belabor the point as I'm belaboring a point.
No, it's worth saying.
But I'm going to belabor that point forever.
Yeah.
I can remember when Luke Fickell had his year as the head coach and they played at Miami, and there were some real issues with like Luke's use of timeouts in that game. And it was early in him being a head coach for the first time. And it was like, I don't think you did that the right way. And I think I asked him 3 questions in the news conference the next Tuesday. And like every time I said, like, I don't mean to belabor the point, but what is up with the timeouts? And then he'd be like, and I'd say, I don't mean to belabor the point, but seriously. And it was like, I'm belaboring the heck out of this. This is more serious. Let's bring up the Kirby Smart Ryan Day comparison graphic. I do think they are close enough. They certainly are in the same generation, 45 and 49. Ryan Day is making $10 million a year. Kirby Smart just got a new contract that's going to pay him $13 million a year. I think he was the 3rd highest paid coach last year behind Saban and Dabo. Now he's the highest paid coach in college football. 94 and 16 overall for Kirby Smart, 56 and 8 for Ryan Day. But the thing I do think that stands out a little bit, Ryan Day 17 and 8 versus the top 25, which means Ryan Day does not have that mysterious, horrible loss on his resume. Everyone's a top 25 loss, but 17 and 8 versus 31 and 9. Kirby Smart, 31 and 9 on the top 25. Now that's puffed up a little bit by beating SEC teams who are ranked number 22 at the time you beat them, and they don't deserve to be ranked number 22. So congratulations on beating Arkansas, but it was a fake ranking. But there's a lot of good wins in there. Would you say that the thing that, yes, the national titles are one of the things, but also Ryan Day at the moment among the Ohio State fan base is questionable in big games. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
I think Kirby Smart has established himself. Now, he just lost the SEC championship game last year in a season with an easy schedule, where they did play some teams in November and had a couple decent wins, but they kind of had you saw them marching to 12-0 more or less. And then they got to, brass tacks time, and they lost to Alabama. So that was like a big loss for them in a world where people were saying like, oh man, it's Georgia's against everybody. It was like, are you sure? Do we know about Georgia right now? 31 and 9 versus 17 and 8. Is that a huge gap? What does that tell you maybe about the success in the biggest games for these two coaches?
Yeah, it seems like a pretty nice gap. I do think it's fair to question Ryan Day's or whether or not he's always handled the biggest games the right way. Right, certainly the Michigan game falls into that, but the some of the playoff games, it's hard too, because like if you don't remove the Michigan games, but like if the next thing you might talk about when you sort of criticize Ryan Day in big games might be the Alabama national championship, and it was like they were missing half their roster in that game. It's like, would they have beaten Alabama with a full deck? I don't know. That Alabama offense was pretty good, but the lopsided nature of that score is at least on some level the byproduct of Ohio State losing a bunch of starters because of COVID going into that game. So like, I don't know that I necessarily hold that against him, and it's not that Ryan Day hasn't won big games. He has, right? He's won Big Ten championships. He has beaten Michigan. He's won a playoff game in pretty impressive fashion. So it's not that he's like a zero in big games, but I think Kirby Smart has built up enough or probably significantly more credibility on those kind of stages than Ryan Day has. But to your point, it is worth pointing out that record is probably inflated for Kirby, like, and maybe should be different for Ryan Day too, right? Like I think Ryan Day and Ohio State have beaten some decent Big Ten teams that weren't considered quote unquote big games because that team wasn't in the top 25 for whatever reason. So it's not quite what the numbers might tell you, but I do think that Kirby Smart still has a decided edge there.
One other thing I forgot about Kirby Smart that I think is Ryan Day moving toward this. When Kirby Smart called the timeout before Ohio State was going to run the fake punt in the semifinal, because Kirby Smart was so locked in on special teams. He saw an alignment and ran like he's the head coach, but he's locked in on special teams.
Yep.
I could not have envisioned Ryan Day doing that previously, but I could now envision Ryan Day doing that in a world where he has said he's going to be more locked in on special teams and they don't have a full-time special teams coach. And didn't you like that from Kirby?
I did like it from Kirby. And like what I think further illustrates your point is that Ryan Day didn't realize that Ohio State had 12 players on the field on that particular play, right? So now I think
Parker, how many Parker for real? Parker. But now there's no one to turn to.
Right.
That's you. I like that. Parker for Park again. No Parker. Kirby doesn't have a Parker to yell at. Now
I bet there's someone on that staff named Parker. It's Georgia. I know exactly what kind of haircut he has too.
Parker Bennett, man. Stetson's second cousin. Let's do a breakdown. Both sides of the ball. What do we start? We're starting with Ohio State defense, Georgia offense. Ohio State defense, Georgia offense. We talked about this. Ohio State has so much back on defense. It's 9 starters. It's Caleb Downs coming in, and it's Cody Simon as a co-starter stepping into Tommy Eichenberg's spot. Basically, it's the entire defense back, though. 9 returning starters. For Georgia, a lot back. 7 returning starters, 3 backups stepping up, and 1 transfer in running back Trevor Etienne from Florida. But I see some holes here, Bill. And I want can I state my thesis? Let me state my thesis.
State it.
I don't think Georgia is as good as people think they are. Okay. They have a lot back. They have 4 or 5 starters back on the offensive line. Cedric Van Pran, their center, was drafted. He's the only guy they lost. Ernest Green, their left tackle, is a monster. You love him, right? You big on Ernest Green?
Yeah, great.
They have Xavier Truss back at right tackle, 2 guards back, including Tate Ratledge. You a big Tate Ratledge fan?
Tate Ratledge might be the best guard, or maybe second best guard in the country. Yeah.
So real stuff on the offensive line. I do not know about their skill guys. And let me say, I think we need to be prepared for Georgia having a get out of jail free card during this 3-year run that is now gone in Brock Bowers. And so they have, and the other thing is we've talked a lot about, well, let me hold that. How much are they going to miss Brock Bowers?
A ton. Yeah, a lot. I like their tight ends. Like I think Oscar Delp is pretty good. And they got Ben Urasek from Stanford, who's also pretty good. So like they're not bad at tight end. They're just not generationally good at tight end anymore.
At running back, they've had a nice plan of playing 2 or 3 running backs, and almost always one of them was an underclassman. So maybe you were the 3rd guy one year, but you had a real role. Then the next year, 1 or 2 guys left, and you moved up in the pecking order, and they had a real nice plan with that. Last year, Dejon Edwards and Kendall Milton combined for 285 carries, 1,671 yards. It was a 2-man thing last year. They're both gone. And they brought in Trevor Etienne because of that. Now they have another guy who missed a chunk of last year with an injury, but they are not in that, when Ohio State played them a couple of years ago, they had Kenny McIntosh and Dejon Edwards and Kendall Milton. And you liked all 3. And then Kenny McIntosh left and Edwards and Milton moved. They got off track with their running back plan. So they got off track with the running back plan. They lost Brock Bowers, and they have their number 1, 3, and 5 receivers back from last year in terms of number of catches by receivers. But they lost Ladd McConkey, who was hurt for part of last year, but I think was part 2 of their get out of jail free card when you didn't know what was going to happen with the offense. So in a world where, yes, they have a good transfer, but it's not the running back plan they've had. They lost their generational tight end, and they lost their most reliable receiver. Dominic Lovett had led them in catches last year because of McConkey's injury. I don't know. Would he start for Ohio State? I think he's fine, but they have not had great receivers. Would he start for Ohio State? Would he start over Carnell Tate?
No.
Okay. Wouldn't start for Ohio State. I have very real questions about the skill guys for Georgia and whether they are elite. And I think we can say, well, they haven't been elite.
Mm-hmm.
Kenny McIntosh was like a 7th-round pick. I was slobbering all over Kenny McIntosh at that game. Catch out of the backfield. Dejon Edwards is more of a powerful runner. I get it. Kendall Milton didn't get drafted last year, right? I mean, it's not necessarily Nick Chubb and Sony Michel all the time, but Bowers and McConkey, man, I think that might blow a hole in this offense, and I'm not sure who's going to patch it.
I agree. I don't think the skill scares you, right?
Yes.
I think their offensive line is very good, and I like Carson Beck. But the rest of it, I think, and Trevor Etienne is good, right? But we haven't seen him in Georgia uniform. So he also didn't he get popped for speeding like immediately after going to Georgia?
I think so. I think at Florida he went like 4 miles over the speed limit. Like a little bit, like the flow of traffic. He was a flow of traffic kind of guy, and he got to Georgia and he was like, "Ho, dog mentality."
It's the Autobahn out there. No, I don't look at Georgia's collection of skill necessarily and see like I don't know, national championship level, but as you mentioned, like I don't think you would say that most years with Georgia, but they just still don't have the X factor of Brock Bowers. But I'm very curious what Oscar Delp can be, because I think he's got some pretty serious upside, I think. And just like people don't talk about him because he was behind Brock Bowers, which is totally fair. But like now it's his time, so we'll see. But I don't see anybody at the skill positions at Georgia that would start for Ohio State. I think Oscar Delp would start for Ohio State if he were here. Like absolutely would start here as number 1 tight end. But receiver, running back, I think Ohio State is better than Georgia.
How much do you like Carson Beck? Do you think he will be the best quarterback in college football this year?
I think he could be. I don't know if I had to pick one to be the best quarterback. I might go Quinn Ewers this year. I might go like Noah Fafita, but I think Carson Beck is pretty solid. Like, seems decisive. Seems like he can read stuff out. Like, quick to get the ball out. A little bit athletic. Like, strong. Like he does. It's almost like a elevated version of Stetson Bennett, almost like it's like if Stetson
How
Bennett
dare you, sir?
If Stetson Bennett had an NFL arm, like that's Carson Beck. Like I do like Carson Beck quite a bit. Yeah,
I know. An Ohio State Georgia matchup: Ohio State defense versus Georgia offense. Who has the edge?
I think Ohio State's defense has the edge.
They might be able to give Beck some time, but I definitely could see the Ohio State DBs locking down these Georgia receivers. Give me Sonny Styles or Caleb Downs following Oscar Delp around, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that guy doesn't kill you. And making it hard on Carson Beck. Maybe not being in his face all day, but just not having lanes to throw. And then I just don't know if the run game's going to scare you or not. So maybe with that offensive line, and ETN was good at Florida. Everybody wanted ETN. Is he the second best running back in the portal behind Judkins? Right?
Yeah.
These two teams each got a huge portal guy.
And so Ohio State was interested in ETN too. Like I
don't want to be dismissive. He's good.
There was a time earlier on where we thought maybe ETN might be the guy for Ohio State.
Yeah. So he's good. But I would take the Ohio State defense in this matchup. So
yeah,
keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. I don't even think it's not much of a conversation for me either. Like I just think Ohio State's stronger, kind of across the board, right? The one thing I guess that would worry me might be the strong word. Like I remain curious about what Ohio State has on the defensive line behind the top 4 guys, and like in a matchup against an offensive line like this, like you don't want to at a juncture of the game have to like throw your number 3 and 4 defensive tackles out there and then they get pummeled into the ground while Georgia runs off a touchdown drive where they ran the ball 11 times, right? So I think that's a question that needs to be answered for Ohio State, but like best 11 versus best 11, offense versus defense, I like Ohio State's defense.
Let's flip it. Let's talk about the Ohio State offense versus the Georgia defense. Again, we've been talking about this Ohio State offense. We know they have Will Howard as a transfer quarterback. We know they have Jeremiah Smith as a freshman receiver. We know maybe the tight end will be a transfer center, Seth McLaughlin. We know the Ohio State offense. This Georgia defense has a lot back. It does have a lot back. And there are names that you recognize from the game 2 seasons ago, and there are guys still at Georgia that matter. 8 returning starters on the Georgia defense, 5 returning starters on the Ohio State offense, 3 backups elevating to starter status for Georgia, 3 backups elevating to starter status for the Ohio State offense, plus 2 transfers for the Ohio State offense and freshman Jeremiah Smith. No transfers. So again, a little credit. I don't know. Only 1 transfer in the starting lineup for Georgia. So again, they're developing their guys, but there are some young guys that would be familiar to Ohio State fans. Malachi Starks, who was a starting safety as a true freshman, is still there. Michael Williams as a pass rusher who sacked CJ Stroud in that game 2 years ago, beat Paris Johnson on a play, is still there. So there are some real, Smail Mondan is like a real dude. Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson at defensive tackle feels like they've been, Nazir Stackhouse is like in year 11, I think.
Yeah, he's been there.
Still there. So they have, of their top 13 guys in snaps from last year, they lost 5. They lost Kamari Lassiter in the secondary. They lost Tyke Smith in the secondary. They lost Javon Bullard, the slot safety who rocked Marvin Harrison Jr. and didn't get called for a penalty. They lost him. They lost Zion Logue. They lost Zion Logue at defensive tackle, and then Jamin Dumas Johnson, one of their linebackers, transferred. But this is a lot back, and it has a chance to be a really good Georgia defense, but I don't think it's first national championship level Georgia defense. That if you really like the guys that really jump, I think Michael Williams is maybe a top 15 pick as a pass rusher, and people really seem to like Malachi Starks on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that you have the depth of like top 3 round NFL guys like you did a couple years ago.
Yeah, I would say that both national championship defenses were probably better than this one's going to be. But again, it's a bad Georgia defense under Kirby Smart is still like top 15 in the country, right? They're still going to be really good. They're going to be athletic all over the place. I just don't. I'll be interested to see how it develops up front for them. Like if anyone besides Michael Williams can become like a consistently reliable kind of presence up front in terms of disrupting some things. So, but they're going to be very good. Like I think Ohio State's defense will be better, but I actually think that we talked about Michigan last week. I think Michigan's defense probably has a shot of being better than Georgia's defense, but I think we're also talking about maybe like 3 of the best 7 defenses in college football next year.
So this is like the point I want to make. So in 2021, Georgia won the national title with its defense.
Mm-hmm.
This defense is not as good as that. In 2022, I think it's fair to say Georgia won the national title with its offense because Ohio State dropped nearly 50 on them, and Stetson Bennett led a game-winning drive with Brock Bowers, with a 3-headed monster at running back, with a super veteran guy that, for all the times I make fun of Stetson Bennett, he operated that offense to peak efficiency with a great offensive coordinator in Todd Monken. And so I don't think this offense is as good as the 22 offense for Georgia.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So it doesn't mean they're bad, but don't be scared. I think people inflate Georgia. I think our boy Ari inflates Georgia. Ari sometimes can be like, why do we even have it a season? Well, Georgia, 5 stars. Why even play the games? Seeing the national. No, it's not. I don't think that's true. They're very good. I don't think they're unbeatable. I don't think they're scary. I don't think you're pulling your hair out trying to figure out what you're going to do the way you might have with their defense in 21 and the way they were rolling at the end of the year, the way you might have with their offense in 22. They're very good. But I don't think it's the rest of the country chasing Georgia this season because they have such a gigantic talent edge.
No, I don't. This feels different than that. And maybe my point of view might be skewed just because I know that there's going to be like more access to the playoff, right? So maybe that is subconsciously affecting the way I view it. But from a talent, like Georgia has recruited better than anybody in the last 5 years, right? So like when they lose guys, they're more than likely going to find an answer to replace them. But it's like there's a bunch of like known commodities like up and down this roster, right? I don't think they are neither. I think they will not have the best offense of college football. They will not have the best defense of college football. They'll probably be top 12 in both. And that kind of balance is scary, right? But it's not like some, I don't know, insurmountable opponent for Ohio State or anybody else is in the national championship conversation. Like I think Georgia is very good, but they are something less than that this year. And I think like look at we're going to talk about their schedule at all because their schedule is like kind of a gauntlet. Like Georgia might lose twice or I don't know, maybe even 3 times in the regular season this year, right? Would it surprise you if they lost 2 or 3 games?
No. So give me what you're talking about. You're talking about Bama. You're talking about Texas. What else are you talking about?
Yeah, well, they open with Clemson and Atlanta. Like they'll probably win that game, but that's not an easy one. They play at Alabama. They play at Texas. They play at Ole Miss. Like you can lose all 3. If Georgia lost all 3 of those games, I don't know that I'd be shocked by that. Like Alabama is like not saving Alabama. I get that, and like Ole Miss has to prove that they're worthy of all the hype they're getting, but I still think they're going to be good teams, and Georgia has to go play them on the road, and then has to play Texas on the road. So I don't think they're going to go through this season unscathed.
I'm here for you predicting Georgia misses the playoff. If they lose those 3 games, and like, what's their best win?
Like Clemson or Kentucky, yeah.
Clemson might not make the playoff either. Like, we got to get in. I won't put the hat on. Oh, that Kentucky wins. Got to get us in the playoff. We're a dangerous 11 seed. Mock draft database looking ahead. First rounders on the early big board. Ohio State has 6. Georgia has 3. Carson Beck, Malachi Starks at safety, and Michael Williams as an edge guy. Top 100 players on that big board. Ohio State has 11. Georgia has 9. So just saying. Offense, Ohio State offense, Georgia defense. Who has the edge?
I'll probably go slightly into Georgia's defense, but it's practically even in my mind.
I think that's right. I think they're looking maybe for a second outside corner still. I think they'll miss Bullard as their slot guy, but I think their secondary will be pretty good. But, they might be able to get after the Ohio State tackles and get after the quarterback a little bit. And just, you don't know. I'd take Carson Beck over Will Howard. So like the quarterback play for Ohio State has enough of a question mark. But you also might be able to run it on him. So I do think I agree with that, but I think the edge to the Ohio State defense versus the Georgia offense is bigger than the edge for the Georgia defense versus the Ohio State offense. Yes?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. So this is, I think it's worthwhile for Ohio State fans to understand Georgia. It is not necessary for Ohio State fans to fear Georgia.
I think that is correct.
You're betting right now. Do they meet in the playoff this year, Ohio State and Georgia? Yes or no?
I kind of think not.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I think not.
I think they do. I kind of want them to.
I want
them to always play. Like I'd be in favor of Ohio State and Georgia meeting in the playoff every year for the next 10 years. But now I have to ask why. Why do you think no?
I just kind of feel like Georgia's going to get knocked off before they get there. Yeah.
Look at you. You want to wear the hat?
I have to think we're going to do playoff picks on KATN, like refresh our playoff picks. And I think maybe the last time we did it, I think maybe I had Georgia 1. I don't think I'm going to do that this time around. And I don't think I'm not going to pick Georgia to miss the playoff, but I don't know that I'm going to like pick them to be the 1 seed and like go to the national title game.
Come get him. Come get him, dogs. He doesn't believe. Bill doesn't have that dog mentality.
I'm going to move him from 1 to 2. Yeah.
Hater. All right. That's our breakdown of what we're expecting from Ohio State and Georgia right now. When we come back, Jeremy Birmingham will join us to talk about the future, the recruiting of the Dogs and the Buckeyes. Next on Kings of Columbus. Back on our Ohio State-Georgia breakdown, Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, now joined by Jeremy Birmingham because we're talking recruiting. Birm, who's better at recruiting, Georgia or Ohio State?
I mean, the numbers would indicate that Georgia is. I don't think it's something that can really be argued. I wouldn't say that they're an apples to apples comparison, however, just because in the state of Georgia, you can spit in any direction and hit a Division I athlete. And so that is a little bit of a different world that they live in, and certainly bordering Florida, being right there next to Alabama, being there next to, closer to Louisiana, closer to Texas. They have a much more fertile recruiting ground to work with, and they've exploited that. They've done a great job. So Georgia is probably the best, recruiting program in the country, and Ohio State would be second, I would think.
When Georgia was not good at recruiting, did it drive you crazy? Like before, it's been a while now. Kirby's been there almost a decade, but there was a time when didn't the world think like, why is Georgia not better at this?
Yeah, I mean, but also demographics have shifted quite a bit in the last 20 years. But when Mark Richt was there, the reason that Georgia was not as good at recruiting is because they didn't cheat like the way that the rest of the SEC did. I mean, that's that was just not Mark Richt's way. And Georgia fans, I think the best part about it is that for decades, Georgia fans stood on the ivory tower saying, well, we're not doing it the way the rest of the SEC is. And then, they would be mad that they weren't winning the national championships. But then as soon as Kirby Smart took over and they started doing things in the Bama way, I mean, basically exactly the same at the start of the Kirby Smart era, then all of a sudden you're winning championships. Everyone's like, hey, this is fine. We're okay with it now. Like, and they caught up. So, but now, I mean, there is no cheating now. So everything's fair and love and recruiting now. And, I look at Georgia the way I look at the early era of John Calipari and Kentucky basketball. Like, there was a couple of years where you had to do what you had to do to set the precedent and set the tone. And once you got over that hump and you started winning the national championships and you started being the place that all the 5 stars wanted to go, you don't have to do the things you used to have to do to draw in that type of talent. And now Georgia can pretty much go anywhere they want without having to be the biggest spender or without having to do all of the crazy things that they had to do in 2017, 2018 to get there.
Is this just the world now? Everything that Bama was on the recruiting trail under Nick Saban, do we just believe that that is now what Georgia and Kirby Smart will be? They will set the standard and be the best recruiting school in the country for the foreseeable future. This is the new world?
Yeah, I think so. And I think what's actually going to be interesting is while we are waiting for another team to step up into the space left by Bama's departure from that supposed tier of college football, like someone else is going to step into that vacuum. I actually wonder if Georgia will be able to exhale a little bit, and that maybe it allows Ohio State to catch up, or USC or Texas to really, because a lot of the times what you do is almost entirely contingent on what do I have to do to beat the Joneses, right? And obviously Saban and Bama was the Joneses. Those two, as good as Ohio State's been at recruiting for the last 20 plus years, I don't think either of those schools really ever considered Ohio State like a threat to them. It's sort of like a nuisance because they knew Ohio State was coming into the South for 3 or 4 players a year, but not on a consistent basis where it's like you're going to be competing against that team all the time. Where with Alabama, you knew you were not just competing against that team demographically, but you were competing for all of the best players in Florida. You were competing for all of the best players in Texas. In the last couple of years, it was more Alabama and Georgia competing for the best players in California. Like it was always those two. So I actually asked Jeff Sentel from DogNation.com, who's one of the most like connected Georgia recruiting insider folks, like, does Georgia view Ohio State as a threat right now? And his answer was that Georgia's only concern is Georgia. And I'm not sure if I entirely believe it, but I don't disagree on its face. And I think if Ohio State's staff is being honest with themselves, they would say, we don't really concern ourselves with anybody but Ohio State and Georgia. Like, that's how I think that they would view it, because I just think Georgia, the ground that they have to recruit from is so fertile. Like, you can do whatever you want. And now we see actually Georgia starting to extend into the Midwest. And you've seen what they've done in the last couple cycles in the Midwest. And I think it's because they're seeking a balance, because I think Kirby Smart long-term understands that he can't sustain a program only on the hyper athletic Southern, demo that he's been building it on. He needs some guys that are willing to come in and develop for 3-4 years. Needs to be able to balance the salary cap world that we're in now, because if you're Georgia, you have the luxury of top 10 picks all over the place in your backyard on the defensive line and at linebacker, et cetera. But you still have to be able to recruit a quarterback, and you still have to be able to recruit offensive players. And there are a lot of those good players in the Midwest that Ohio State can't recruit them all, because they need to recruit in California and in Florida and in Georgia if they want to compete nationally. And so there's a vacuum in the Midwest that Georgia can now come in and say, hey, why would you not come to Georgia? It's not that far. We win national championships. You'll make a lot of money, and you can come in and develop. And Georgia can point to guys like Stetson Bennett, even though I wouldn't consider him like a culture builder. He was a guy that obviously had some off the field stuff to deal with, but he was a player that walked on, had all of the story. You look at Ladd McConkey, like they can actually say, we actually develop players better than anybody now, and we also take first round picks and who get recruited and they stay first round picks. So that's a rare combination.
Dogs only concern themselves with dogs. Are they here to stay, Bill? Like, this is the world? It's from a recruiting perspective. And I do think there's an interesting thing that Birm brought up is they did lose some of their depth in the transfer portal this offseason, right? That is a consideration for them, just like it is for everybody in the NIL world. To some degree, it happened at Ohio State too. But in terms of recruiting, Georgia is and will be what Bama has been. That's true or false, Bill?
That is true as long as Kirby Smart is there. Yeah. Okay. Kirby has the playbook.
Because you made the sweep through the South 10 years ago on your recruiting trip with Ari, where you were in the midst of like, hey, like there's opportunities down here, right? Did you not feel that you were in the state of Georgia and feeling that Georgia was not dominating the state of Georgia?
Yeah, that was like a huge part of what we did then. That was toward the end of the Mark Richt tenure, like just before Kirby got there, I guess, right? Is that right? The timing on that?
Yeah.
Years, right? I mean, that was like 14 you guys had that, right? So
it was 14, yeah. So, and I can't remember what school it was. We were in it. We went to a couple schools in Georgia, but one of them in particular, like we had a really long conversation with the high school head coach about how the program Georgia was not prioritizing the state of Georgia the right way. And like, I can't remember the coach's name, but it was actually really funny. Like a month later, Georgia hired that guy as like one of their like player personnel guys. Yeah. So that was really funny, but no, there was at that time when we were down there, like Georgia kind of felt like it was ripe for the picking. And I suppose it always will be because there is so much high school football talent in Georgia. It's absurd. Like the Bulldogs can't take all of them. So like teams will always be there taking players, but I think more often than not, the best ones in Georgia will probably end up going to the University of Georgia. And that necessarily wasn't the case before Kirby got there.
I think, if you look at like Raekwon McMillan, who I'm not suggesting that you guys were at Liberty County High School and that's the coach you're talking about, Bill, but I mean, when Mark Richt was there, Raekwon McMillan was, I think, either the top ranked player in the state of Georgia in the class of 2014, or maybe the second ranked. I'm not sure, but he was definitely up there. And throughout his entire recruitment, Ohio State was the team to beat because Georgia just flat out dropped the ball and didn't go after him very aggressively. Ended up being Ohio State and Alabama as the final two, but he picked Ohio State close to signing day. But then there was Richard LeCount, who was a 5-star safety at the same high school, Liberty County, in the class of 2017. And Richie was a player that Ohio State was confident like for 3 years because he basically was with Raekwon all the time. They thought, hey, we're going to get Richard LeCount. And then Mark Richt lost his job right at the start of that cycle, and Kirby Smart took over, and Richie LeCount committed to Georgia like 2 weeks later. And it's like, okay, things are different now. Like, and things have been substantially different ever since. Georgia is a program that understands it has to be built on the backs of Georgia players, but it is not requiring them to recruit everyone in the state. As you said, like you can't do it. There's the Jelani Thurmans of the world. There's the Caden McDonalds. The Georgia did not try to recruit Aaron Olin. He's a 5-star quarterback in their backyard. Like they didn't, they're like, yeah, we don't need him. Like there's 50 or 60 high level 4-star, 5-star prospects in Georgia every year. So you're only going to sign 16 or 17 of them, and then you're going to sign, 10 guys from the other parts of the country. But Ohio State is the only school that's really consistently been able to go into Georgia and win on those high level players, other than Alabama in the last couple of years. So it's an interesting battle. I don't know that Georgia considers it one.
I can tell you.
Let's pull up the stats real quick, just to drop the context on where Ohio State and Georgia are ranking in their recruiting classes. 2024, Ohio State was third in the country in average star rating. Georgia was first. 2023, Ohio State third, Georgia second. 2022, Ohio State third, Georgia fourth. 2021, Ohio State second, Georgia fourth. So even in the last couple of years, you see maybe average star rating Georgia was slightly behind Ohio State, now has moved to slightly ahead of Ohio State. But these teams are as close as they can be when it comes to overall recruiting classes. Bill, go ahead with what you're going to say.
I just wanted to put a bow on the story that I told. We were at Creekside High School, Birm. That's where Venzel Boulware was. And Alton Downs was his high school coach. And I'm like, he went on the record saying this stuff, so I don't care. But we talked with him in January of 2015. And then in 2015, he became a quality control coach for Georgia. And then when Kirby got hired, he kept him on staff as an assistant director of player development. But the reason we went to that school specifically is because at the time, Venzel Boulware was a recruit that was getting recruited by Tennessee and I think an Ohio State. But when Mark Richt visited that high school, he posed for a photo with Venzel while Venzel was wearing a Tennessee sweatshirt. And that picture was the way that we couched it was could you ever imagine Urban Meyer going to visit a prospect and taking a picture with a recruit who was wearing the hoodie of another school? And the answer is absolutely not. But Mark Richt did it when he went to go Creekside to recruit Venzel. Yeah.
And then Venzel signed with Tennessee, and I think he ended up transferring to Miami or something. But the way that Ohio State recruits Ohio is pretty simple. It's if we want a guy in the state, no one else is going to get him, right? That's basically what Georgia has done in the state of Georgia, which is why the last couple of years, I think the most interesting trend was when you saw Caleb Downs go to Alabama, when you saw Justice Haynes go to Alabama. Justice Haynes' dad is a Georgia legacy. And I've talked about this on Talking Stuff and other shows before, but if Ohio State had a Buckeyes legacy in the state of Ohio that was not just a player at Ohio State, but Veron Haynes is a Georgia great, a guy that went to the NFL, growing up playing in his backyard, in Georgia's backyard, and then he chooses not just to leave the state but to go to your biggest rival. Can you imagine if that happened at Ohio State? What people how they'd react? And Georgia just okay, well, no big deal. We'll just go sign a 5-star running back from California instead. They don't care. They're just built a little bit different. It's not personal for them. In that area, they realize there's so many guys here. We're going to go get the best guys in the country. And that's what happens when you win national championships, though. You gain that ability. It's like a superpower where you can say, hey, well, now we can go anywhere we want.
Can I ask a question off the heels of that? Why is Buford? What's the disconnect of Buford High School with the Georgia football program, and why has Ohio State been able to get a little bit of a foothold at a pretty good high school program in that state?
I don't know what. It's almost like Buford is a magnate school, or it's dropped in from somewhere else. It's the kids there, and I say this, and I don't know if it's the coaching staff that's just encouraging them to be different. The kids there are just different. They're just a different breed of kid. They are very open-minded. They are kids that are not generally hemmed into the idea of I grew up wanting to play for the Dogs and I have to. And I generally that comes from parents who are transplants and people who are not growing up dreaming of whatever Georgia's red is and wearing it. What do they call Georgia's red? Is it just Georgia red?
Dog red.
Dog red.
Well, I don't know. It's a great question.
KJ Bolden.
Yeah, well, KJ Bolden, obviously that's a story. I mean, if you look at last year's recruiting efforts, he was related to Perry Eliano like a second cousin. He commits to Florida State. Georgia just wasn't. That's a situation Georgia was just not going to let him go somewhere else. And Georgia well, we haven't really talked about NIL because Georgia is a program that at this point doesn't need to rely entirely on NIL. But if it comes down to it and they have to like swing the big stick, they will swing it. And end of the day, they just told KJ, "You're not going somewhere else," and made it so that he couldn't. And that's that's what makes Georgia so particularly threatening to me as a recruiting foe, is that they can win without having to do the stuff that other schools have to. Like if Ohio State loses a recruit to Miami, Justin Scott will, for example, like we know fully well what ultimately won that battle for Miami. If you look at Georgia, look at Trey Scott, their defensive line coach. The guy is like he's awesome. He's great at it, and he develops and recruits and turns monsters into bigger monsters. And he's also very young. He's very relatable. Like they can beat you on a number of different levels. So it's like if Georgia really wants a player in the state of Georgia, it's almost not worth trying to take them, which is why like Caleb Downs choosing Ohio State over Georgia after choosing Alabama over Georgia. Like it was clear to me in his recruitment, and I said it as much at the time. Like I just didn't think Caleb Downs ever wanted to go to Georgia. And so if he did, like he would have been there multiple times by now. But there's just a couple times, a couple kids that will escape, but the percentage is so low because there's so many kids there that you just can't win them all.
So Ohio State has gotten some Georgia guys. Is Ohio State's strategy, particularly in the state of Georgia, go after those guys that Georgia is not in on as heavy? Or at times, is Ohio State willing to go absolutely head-to-head? I guess maybe KJ Bolden was an example. Absolutely willing to go head-to-head with Georgia for a guy in Georgia's backyard.
They are willing to do it, but it is not the preferred path. If you look at the players Ohio State has signed from Georgia in the last few years, there are not many players that I would think that would consider that Georgia really wanted. They didn't offer Caden McDonald. I mean, for example, even though he was the Gwinnett County Player of the Year, which, if you're the Gwinnett County Player of the Year, you're basically a future NFL player. Like it is as talented a region as you will find in the country. But Georgia, because they have a archetype they want at defensive line, 6'5", 340-pound guys. Caden McDonald was 6'1.5", 6'2", 320 pounds, and so he escaped the gaze of the Bulldogs. But the rest of the guys, they didn't recruit Jelani Thurman, they didn't recruit Aaron Noland, they didn't recruit Bennett Christian. They didn't. I mean, the Buckeyes, I think, have 9 players from Georgia, so that's over 10% of the roster, 10% of the scholarship roster. That's pretty good. But I don't think any of those players, other than Caleb Downs, are someone Georgia actively went after. And it's going to be the same thing. Like Ryan Montgomery in the class of 2025, obviously committed to Georgia. It's a player that Ohio State ostensibly offered, but they picked someone else. So if Georgia's going to come into the Midwest, they're going to take players that Ohio State has essentially passed on. If Nitro Tuggle, the wide receiver that Georgia signed in the class of 2024 from Fort Wayne, if Ohio State wants a wide receiver from Fort Wayne, they would have got him, but they didn't. And so Georgia is going to be happy to take those leftovers. And there's a couple battles coming in the Midwest. Taylon Taylor, a wide receiver from Illinois, who's down to Ohio State, Georgia, and Notre Dame. He's probably tier 2 when it comes to Ohio State's preference list, but he's definitely tier 1 for Georgia. So, Georgia will end up probably winning that battle if Notre Dame doesn't keep him in the Chicago metro area. But I don't know that Georgia, as good as they are, they're not coming to Ohio and taking the players Ohio State wants. I mean, they've tried, like Justin Hill, the linebacker / edge player at Winton Woods in the class of 2025. He's visited Georgia, and I mean, he's not going to go there. He has an offer, but it is. I think there's a lot of mutual respect between Ohio State and Georgia, but I do feel like Ohio State probably fears Georgia more than Georgia fears Ohio State. But I think that's also. So I'm sorry, I keep rambling. Ohio State needs Georgia players to win a national championship more than Georgia needs Midwest players to win a national championship.
Yeah.
Okay, I am intrigued, like the quarterback situation with these two schools at the moment. Bill, I just want to make sure everybody understands the pieces here, right? So Georgia, Ohio State had a commitment from Dylan Raiola. Then he decommitted. Then he moved to Georgia, to Buford, right? Played at Buford his senior year, was committed to Georgia, then decommitted from Georgia and wound up at Nebraska. So they both were in on Dylan Raiola. Neither got him. Air Noland is from Georgia, wound up at Ohio State. Now in this coming class, Ryan Montgomery is from Ohio and is committed to Georgia. When they didn't get Dylan Raiola, the quarterback Georgia got was Ryan Puglisi, who's from Massachusetts. And they've also now gotten Jaden Rashada out of the portal after he went to Florida and Arizona State. So the future for Georgia at quarterback is third school Jaden Rashada and Ohio's Ryan Montgomery, and Massachusetts own Ryan Puglisi, while Air Noland is up here and Julian Sayin is at Ohio State. Like, just I'm intrigued by how all these pieces worked out in the quarterback rooms for Georgia and Ohio State, because there is some crossover and overlap.
There's more crossover than you think, though, Doug. Like Gunnar Stockton, who's also on Georgia's, like Corey Dennis loved Gunnar Stockton. He was at the top of his list. Ryan Puglisi is a player Ohio State was very, very high on in the class of 2024. Although, they didn't really make a move because they had Raiola committed and then they had Air Noland committed, but had something gone the wrong way with Air Noland during his recruitment, I think Ohio State would have really tried to get Ryan Puglisi because Georgia had Dylan Raiola committed at the time, so they felt like they would have had an option. If you look, Julian Sayin, I can speak clearly on this. I am very confident that his first choice when he committed to Alabama was actually Georgia, but Georgia was not ready to take him because they thought they were going to flip Dylan Raiola. So like it was. There's a lot more crossover than maybe even it looks like on the outside.
Do you like that future for Georgia at quarterback, Bill? I'm wondering a little bit of a world where, I mean, if everybody loves Puglisi, maybe they love Puglisi, but you're getting an Ohio kid, you're getting a third school guy. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's okay. Like Jaden Rashada is a third school guy, but he's also a pretty highly rated recruit, right? It's not like he's on his third school in like a year because of some weird circumstances, not necessarily because he's a bad player.
Yeah.
I think Ryan Montgomery probably would need a couple of years before he's ready to play at a place like Georgia. And I know like we've got connections to people who know some Georgia folks pretty well. Like they also think very highly of Puglisi. So like, I think it's okay. It's a little interesting to me that it does feel a little scattershot, like their quarterback future plan for the program that they are. It should be a little, I don't know, more clear, I suppose, than it is. And I realize I'm saying that in a season when Ohio State is going to start a transfer at quarterback, but I think we all believe that Ohio State has a better idea of where its quarterback room is going, probably than Georgia does, and probably than most programs do. And it's a little surprising to me that Georgia doesn't have maybe a little more stability than it appears to have at that position.
I don't think that they care, if I'm being honest with you. They won the national championship with Stetson Bennett.
Right.
Don't disrespect.
They believe fully that they are going to continue to win national championships by having 8-star defensive linemen and 8-star linebackers, and that as long as they have a serviceable quarterback, they can win national championships. What you're going to get, which is I think the real benefit of their recruiting approach at quarterback right now, is you're going to be playing quarterbacks that are in their third or fourth year, and they're going to be more physically developed. They're going to have more time in the program. You're not counting on freshmen and sophomores at quarterback to win you a national championship, and they don't need to. And so they're not, as much as Georgia has been one of the at the forefront of the NIL stuff and pay for play over the last half decade, or at least 2017, 2018, 2019, when everything really started there again. They're not doing that at quarterback. Like Julian Lewis, who's the number 1 ranked player in the country in the class of 2025, is a quarterback in Georgia committed to USC. They are not interested in going out and playing the NIL game with the quarterback that's going to require them to play him as a freshman. Like that's not who they are. It's not what they're building it on. But if you look in Georgia, I mean, the top player in the state of Georgia is a defensive lineman. The second-ranked player is a linebacker. Third-ranked player is a defensive lineman committed to USC. 3 of the top 6 players in Georgia right now, including 2 defensive linemen, are committed to USC. So they are focused on how are we going to keep the defensive lineman home, and then we can go find Ryan Puglisi, who's going to be more than happy to sit and develop for 3 years in the Georgia program, and then turn the program over to him in 2025. They will be thrilled to do that, because that's how you win games in the SEC. The SEC quarterback play is not something where you look around over the last couple decades and, wow, the quarterback play in the SEC has been great, but yet they keep winning all the national championships. You have the Joe Burrow year, but they don't win that way down there. Ohio State's been winning and being in the conversation because they've had such crazy quarterback play. These schools are winning it without it.
Such absolute disrespect of Stetson Bennett. I can't believe that I am now the Stetson Bennett stan on this show. Let's show what's going to happen in this recruiting class, Mike. The 2025 recruiting class so far, Ohio State versus Georgia. Ohio State 13 commits, 3 of them 5 stars, the number 1 overall star rating in this class so far. Georgia 9 commits, 1 5-star, 7th in overall star rating. Birm, again, is this just Georgia taking its time? Are they actually hurt a little bit by a couple of the guys that you said USC has come in and grabbed? I mean, Georgia's not going to wind up 7th in star rating in this class, but what do you think of where it stands right now for 2025?
It's just sort of the old Bama approach. Like they don't have to hurry. They never have to hurry because there are so many guys at home. If you look at those players, the Justice Terry, the defensive lineman committed to USC, and Isaiah Gibson, the edge, committed to USC again. 2 of the top 6 players in Georgia. They're going to sign those dudes. Like they're going to end up winning those battles. And the same with Elijah Griffin, the 5-star defensive end from Savannah. They will sign him. Zayden Walker, the 5-star linebacker from Ellaville, they'll sign him. Josh Petty, who's the number 4 player in the state of Georgia, is an offensive tackle, and Georgia's like, we don't care. Like they have so many guys to choose from. They will finish as a top 2 or 3 class in the country, just like they do every year. And they'll probably do it more now the Bama style, which is wait until November, figure out exactly what everyone needs, figure out what everyone is requiring, and then go just get them at the end. Because the lure of playing in the SEC, despite the fact that, Big Ten is now, the defending national champion, the SEC pull down there is so strong. There are a number of very influential prospect trainers and people who work with these kids on a day in, day out basis who flat out tell them, do not go anywhere other than the SEC. Like, if you want to win a national championship, if you want to be developed for the NFL, you have to play in the SEC. Now, that's complete garbage, but it works. And it certainly influences kids a lot. Their interest is staying home. And when you have that sort of ground to pick from, Georgia does not have to hurry at all.
It's almost like if there was a show that extolled the virtues of the North, to try to fight that battle and explain that isn't how it has to be. I wonder if that'd be a good idea if somebody did that. All right.
I'm willing to bet you Georgia's 7th in the country right now. They have their huge first official visit weekend. They do this big treasure hunt or scavenger hunt thing.
I love scavenger hunts.
I wonder what they're going to find. I wonder what they're going to find.
Well, the whole goal is to find Kirby Smart. That is this weekend coming up. I'm willing to bet you Georgia moves up to 4th by this time next week. Like
what if it was you looked behind a rock and there was a Stetson Bennett bobblehead? How great would that be? That would just
crack it open and you crack it open and then there's wads of cash in there.
I wouldn't crack it open. I would just want to keep the bobblehead. All right. That's it for our Georgia-Ohio State recruiting breakdown for now. We've done it with Oregon. We've done it with Michigan. We've done it with Georgia, the 3 teams that I think will help most define Ohio State, not just this year, but in the seasons ahead, which means it's time for What You Watching, What You Eating, What You Thinking next on Kings of Columbus. Back on Kings of Columbus, Jeremy Birmingham sticking around for a special appearance here on What You Watching, What You Eating, What You Thinking. Birm, what are you watching?
What I'm watching and what I'm thinking are kind of the same or kind of tied together. So I hope you'll indulge me. My wife and I have been rewatching, or it's a rewatch for me, but a first watch for her, the show Rescue Me on FX, which is 20 plus years old with Dennis Leary, a Dennis Leary vehicle. And it leads me to what I'm thinking, which is how many great shows exist that could not be made today. And it annoys me because I don't know when television and movies and art became so influenced by what we're not allowed to say or think.
We're entering Jerry Seinfeld territory here, Bill. Jerry Seinfeld said this like 2 weeks ago, and everybody got mad at him.
People get mad at me too. But
what is it about? They talk about crotches. What do they talk about on Rescue Me that you can't talk about anymore?
Anything they want. It's not just what they talk about; it's how they talk about it. It's just a very crass, very Boston. It's Boston. It's Boston thoughts, but in the guise of New York firefighters. It's just such a great show. And even if you think back to if you think about The Office, you couldn't make The Office today the way that it was made 15 years ago. And it's one of the great.
You couldn't make the first season of The Office,
right?
You could not make the first season of The Office.
Without the first season, the other ones wouldn't have existed. People, think about it's really the FX library from the early 2000s that I'm The Shield, you just couldn't do it anymore. And I think about how much great TV we would have lost had we been so weird 25 years ago.
Does your wife like it? Does she like it?
She loves it. She loves it. She just calls it the Fire Show.
Oh,
because she never remembers the names of things. She just what do we have to watch tonight? And I'll say, well, we have 90 Day Fiance, of course, or Married at First Sight. And she's like, let's just watch the Fire Show. So it just vacillates from super intense and heartfelt to absurd at 70 times per episode.
Yeah.
And it's really just a great television series.
Yeah. Have you watched it, Landis?
I have not watched it. No.
Yeah, me neither.
I would like to. I like Dennis Leary. I think what you can kind of sum up what Birm's saying by just simply saying Dennis Leary doesn't do stand-up comedy anymore for a reason.
Oh, yeah. I think he's good as the saber-toothed tiger in the Ice Age movies. That's why I like him.
Oh,
there. Yeah.
He's a saber-toothed tiger? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think so.
I like that you're able to bring everything back to cartoon movies, Doug.
Yeah. He doesn't swear. He doesn't talk about crotches when he's a saber-toothed tiger. He's very enjoyable. Bill, what are you watching?
So I try to, when I'm scrolling through Netflix and I see movies that I know are pretty well regarded or have super high IMDb ratings, whatever, that I haven't seen or they came out before, when I was too young to see them. I tried to catalog it and watch it. So one of those movies I watched the other night is Glengarry Glen Ross, which I've never seen before. Yeah,
Birm's seen that. You've seen that, Birm.
I don't think I've actually seen it. It's when I was I'm old enough to have seen it, but I was too young to be interested in something that felt so serious at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, what'd you think, Bill?
I liked it. I think I was 4 when it came out, so of course I didn't see it when I was younger, but I like a movie that has 6 total speaking roles in it, right? It's it's easy to follow, but it's just Al Pacino and Jack Lemmon and Ed Harris and Alan Arkin just seeing who can outact the other for 90 minutes, and it's awesome. It's really good. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Coffee is for closers. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Wow.
I very much enjoyed it.
The whole thing is it's a play. You
Right.
like movies that started off as plays. That's what you want. Because it's just guys sitting in an office.
Right. It's a David Mamet play, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited. I actually saw a David Mamet play in New York with Al Pacino in the lead role. I was there, I think, for something for work, and I got a last minute ticket, and I couldn't believe it. And I was crying. I was so excited to see Al Pacino in a David Mamet play on Broadway. And
What
it was
play was it?
horrible. It was
Hoo-ah, play.
Hoo-ah! It closed in a week. It was just Al Pacino screaming for 2 hours, and then at the end, he beat a guy to death with a model airplane. And I was like, "What is this?" Now that should be right up my alley. But Glengarry Glen Ross. Oh, I like young Bill, 4-year-old Bill. You could have been walking around saying coffee is for closers in preschool. My watching is not a huge thing. It's a show called Hacks it's in its 3rd season now. It's on Max, HBO Max. And I just want to say Jean Smart, who was on Designing Women back in the day, but she's 70 years old, and she's just a tremendous actress, and she's great
Kirby's
in this
mom.
show. Whose mom?
Kirby's mom.
Kirby's mom.
Oh. Yeah, from Designing Women. Can you imagine? That's Kirby's upbringing. My mom was part of a group in the South that ran like an interior design store. She's really good. It's an interesting show. She like came back to prominence. Did you guys watch the season on Fargo when she was like a mob boss on Fargo in like season 3, maybe? Fargo.
I have not watched Fargo.
She was awesome there. So it's not a huge recommendation, but I like it. And the new season is out in season 3, and it's just like a really good TV performance. So if you're looking for something on Max, Birm, what are you eating?
Hold on. You like Apple TV shows, right? Have you watched Sugar with
Sugar? Is that about Bert Sugar? No, who's it about? I have not watched it.
It's about a detective.
Doug can't watch it. He's diabetic.
That's
it's Colin Farrell is the lead. It's like it's a modern story, but it's got a very like film noir like vibe to it, where he's a detective in LA and it's just doing it. But it's pretty good, but it's also kind of weird because it's like a lot of inner dialogue, and all of the inner dialogue ends up revolving around how great he is as a person. And I'm like, I don't want my like swarmy detective to be like a vegan, you know what I mean? Like I want him to be like like a bad person. Who's doing good things. I just am into anti-heroes, I guess, and he's like a hero, but it's still somewhat entertaining. And I know you like the Apple TV series. Went to dinner on Saturday for my nephew's 14th birthday at this place in Toledo called La Fiesta Mexican. I'm a big fan of Mexican, as you may or may not know. And it's a restaurant I've been to many times, but they had this thing called the Sancho taco, which Sancho just means white boy, essentially. It's like it's like gringo Sancho. I think actually Sancho means like spouse. Now that I think about it, I'm making my words wrong. Anyway, it's basically like a crunch wrap from Taco Bell, but only it's like a real restaurant's version of one. And it was unbelievably good. And like it had 3 of them for like $12, and they were monstrous. I couldn't finish them. Like it was huge. But
I like when the good job by the nice restaurant stealing from the Taco Bell menu and then elevating it. That seems like a good business model to me.
Yes, it works.
Yeah,
and it was great. And their service, like we had a party of like 25, and they're like, it's prom night, graduation night, all like the restaurant was packed, and we were in and out of there in like an hour and 15 minutes with a party of 25. So it was really well done.
Crunch wraps in Toledo. Landis, what are you eating?
This will be what I'm drinking. And it's the frosted lemonade at Chick-fil-A. Are you guys familiar with the frosted lemonade?
It's so good. It's the best thing on the menu.
It's delightfully refreshing. Yeah. It's basically like a lemonade milkshake. But Doug, you can get it with diet lemonade too.
Oh, good.
You want to try it out. Their ice cream is still there, and you can get it with I think they literally just mix like their vanilla ice cream and lemonade, but it's so good.
I think there's a little ice in there too, maybe, but
yeah. It's just it's a tasty summer treat. And I know we're not quite in the summer yet, but it's a little warm, and it's nice to have on a warm day.
I don't want to say it's underrated, but like lemon as a flavor can really hit.
Yeah, we went. I'm sure Doug, you're familiar with Witt's frozen custard.
Yes.
Their flavor of the week or whatever was like 2 or 3 weeks ago was like a lemon frozen custard that was delicious. We got a big old pint of it, and I housed it.
What's your favorite lemon vehicle though? Like, where is lemon best served?
Like a lemon loaf, like a lemon bar.
Oh, well, I like a lemon flavored like pound cake almost. Yeah.
Starbucks has an iced lemon pound cake, which is
iced lemon. Yeah.
That's the winner. So I'm eating soup. I guess I'm an old man and I just want to eat soup. But sometimes
you're eating soup in May. It's not soup season.
Soup for dinner. I just want soup for dinner sometimes, and I want it from a place that like is a soup specialist, because too many restaurants you go to, it's like, well, they have a soup, but it's like off to the side. I want soup specialization, and you guys have gone to Zoop, right? Like the fast casual Zoop. The one near me closed. I think some of them are closing, but sometimes it just hits in our house year round, 365. It's like, what do you want to eat? It's like, oh, I want soup. So is soup seasonal to you, Landis? You can't go May soup is out?
It's very seasonal to me, but like when it is soup season, we go hard. Like it's like we're eating soup 2-3 times a week when it's soup season, but
yeah,
it's not. Were you eating like a Panera? Is that what you're doing?
Like at Zoop, where you have they have Zoop has 15 different soups every day that you can choose from.
Yeah.
I have the overstuffed bell pepper soup. I love there.
Nice. Do you make your own soup, Bill? Do you guys, when you go into soup season, do you make homemade soup?
Yeah, we're almost exclusively making our own soup. Yeah.
What's the go-to?
Chicken noodle. It's simple. It's easy enough to make. Sometimes we'll spice it up and make it like a creamy chicken noodle soup. Chicken tortilla soup is a house favorite. We go to that quite a bit. Broccoli ched. Can't go wrong with broccoli ched.
I put so much cayenne pepper in my chicken noodle soup that it's red.
Oh, I don't think that's chicken noodle soup anymore.
That's the way to do it. I think my favorite, if I was living on $5 a week, I think I could get by simply eating ramen with a bunch of hot sauce in it.
Mm-hmm. My favorite soup to make at home is cream of crab soup, because I love cream of crab, and you can't find it anywhere, especially in Northwest Ohio. But to make it is $40 to buy the stuff. So you're
not going out there in Toledo and catching the crab yourself.
Yeah, it's not really efficient. But once a year or so, we'll splurge and go buy the stuff to make cream of crab, and give me a little taste of the East Coast, which I don't know why I like it so much, but I just love cream of crab soup.
And if you got cream of walleye, then you could catch your own in Toledo. It'd be okay. So you thought about you're mad that Rescue Me doesn't exist anymore today. Anything else you're thinking, Birm?
No, I'm just thinking that this is supposed to be the slow time of the year, and it feels like it for Ohio State football, but I still feel like I'm busier than ever. And that's kind of annoying.
Busy's good, brother.
Yeah.
Better than the alternative. Landis, what are you thinking about?
I've learned that I'm now a subtitles when watching movies guy.
I've been that for years. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never minded watching a foreign film that you need the subtitles for. That's never bothered me. But when watching a movie in English, I always thought it was a little silly to have them on, and I found it distracting. And I don't know if it's being more mindful of my volume now that we have a baby or what, but I almost feel like I need it when I watch things. The only thing I don't like it for is live sports. I think it's silly to have on closed captioning for live sports, just watch the game and figure out what's happening. But otherwise, I think I'm team subtitles now. For
any drama, any sort of TV drama, number one, the volume is just like this, because one person talks like this, the other person talks like this, and then you have all these weird dialects, and you have to have it on.
And you find secrets sometimes, because sometimes there are things that people are whispering in the kitchen that there's no chance of you actually hearing, that when it's in the subtitles, oh, that seems important. They're plotting a murder in the kittion. But if you didn't have the subtitles on, you'd never know it.
They're Stetson Bennett didn't graduate.
Dog. Why are you doing this to him? Okay, so
Stetson Bennett was ineligible to play in the Peach Bowl.
My thinking is that on Kentucky Derby Day, I asked our Ohio State Tech subscribers to suggest Ohio State themed names of racehorses. And we got almost 200 responses of just interesting names. The rule is, in naming a horse, you only have 18 characters. That includes spaces. So, you couldn't name your horse, I love Ezekiel Elliott because he's good at running the football, right? There's a limit to this. And so I picked out the 20 best names for the horses, and there were too many to choose from. And then I sent it back to the Tech subscribers and asked them to pick who would win the first Buckeye Derby by ranking those names. And then we ran the Buckeye Derby. So this is the first annual Buckeye Derby, brought to you by Kings of Columbus. The field is set for the first Buckeye Derby, brought to you by Kings of Columbus. We'll run through the field here with the favorite at 2-1, Holy Buckeye. An interesting middle shot is CJ Stride at 5-1, and Silver Bullet 1 to watch at 9-1. Also, Archie 2 times. He's done it twice before. Could he do it again at 10-1? Sweater Vest at 17-1. Kicks Like Nugent, Always Dangerous at 25-1. Then back to where's Lou Holtz? We don't know where he is, but we know he's 50-1. Clydesdale Jones at 60-1. And the long shot, Stallions the Spy. The horses are now at the gate for the first running of the Buckeye Derby, and they're off. Out to an early lead, showing early speed is Gone Gin, joined by Orlando Pacesetter at the front. Then back 2 lengths to CJ Stride, diagnosing what's going on and analyzing the situation. Then back to the local favorite, Caleb Hill Downs, just up from a track in Alabama. Then back 3 lengths to a pack, Urban Mare, Archie 2 times in 310 days, and Hall's Double Bird. Now a collision in the middle of the pack, 85 yards through the Southwest, making a move between horses, and was stiff-hoofed, it appeared, by Beanie's stiff arm. Now back to where's Lou Holtz, who has become distracted, apparently, after seeing an old man in the stands. Then back to Clydesdale Jones, who clearly is not here to play stable. Then Sweater Vest settling in comfortably alongside Hopalong, who's just been kicked by Kicks Like Nugent. Now is hopping, if not limping. Then back to Lloyd McFarquhar and bringing up the rear, Stallions the Spy, who is the first horse we've seen ever run in sunglasses. Now back to the front of the pack. 3 horses have pulled away. It's Couldn't Go for 3. Silver Bullet on the outside and on the rail. Holy Buckeye. It's Holy Buckeye. It's Couldn't Go for 3. It's Silver Bullet. And a photo finish at the wire. It's Holy Buckeye, the winner of the first Buckeye Derby. Holy Buckeye takes it. Couldn't Go for 3 is second. And Silver Bullet is third. And the Buckeye Derby brought to you by Kings of Columbus.
It's a great Keith Jackson.
Whoa.
I played my trumpet. Did you guys see me play my trumpet?
Yeah, so you were actually playing that?
Yeah, it's my old trumpet.
That's pretty good. Also, can I offer one critique?
Hmm?
Missed opportunity to make Where's Lou Holtz 87-1 because that's how old Lou Holtz is.
Oh. People bet him down. They were too excited about thinking about the long shot odds there. So
I can't critique any of that. That was truly one of the most magical things I've ever seen.
yeah, we'll do it every week. So
You couldn't put that on TV these days. You know what I mean?
All right. So that will do it for what you watching, what you eating, what you thinking. That's our Ohio State, Georgia breakdown. We're done with this version of Kings of Columbus. We've done Oregon, we've done Michigan, we've done Georgia. Those are the 3 teams that matter in the context of Ohio State. We'll get back to some other stuff on Kings of Columbus in future episodes. For now, Birm, thanks for coming on, man. Always great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Mike Yarostowski, our great producer, always makes us look good and sound good. And like he had to do that at 9:00 at night last night and say, can we do a fake derby? And he was like, okay. Bill Landis, as always, a pleasure. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was Kings of Columbus.